Often when I meet a client for the first time and I start to get a sense of their childhood trauma history, they have a tendency to talk about one parent more than the other. The parent that they do tend to talk about tends to be that very loud, unsafe, the perpetrating parent. And the parent that they tend to not talk about so much is the person who was married to that blatantly unsafe, abusive person. And I know that this is not true for all of you, meaning that some clients who have gotten to me, like, they know that both of their parents, they know up front that both of their parents were either highly off or acutely abusive or had really poor mental health for both of them. Many just simply talk about the abuse coming from that one parent. In the back of my mind, while I'm talking with them, I'm thinking about that other parent and I'm thinking, did that other parent step in for you? What kind of parent were they for you? And most importantly, I'm thinking, why was your other parent with such an abusive partner? It's a big question. And in this video, I'm really going to be exploring that other parent. And it's important to remember that when children are growing up and developing, for survival, little people can't tolerate the knowledge that both of their parents are not fully safe. We need that one person at least. So as kids, we might idolize or elevate one of our parents to bond with them just because they're not as mean or they are literally safer. And they're not as kind of out there as the perpetrating parent is. And this idealization can sort of lead to something called the safer parent. When I was practicing in my practice, I would often ask a new group or a new client, was one of your parents more safer to you than the other one was? And oftentimes, 9 times out of 10, people would say, yes, one of them was safer, but they're not really able to say in the ways that the parent was maybe potentially narcissistic as well, the safer parent. So in this video, we're going to be looking at that. By narcissistic, I'm not saying they had narcissistic personality disorder. I am saying that the safer parent often has that old school term, a narcissistic injury, where their own trauma and their stuff gets in the way of them doing the right thing, specifically doing the right thing for their children. They don't do anything about the main abuser for personal reasons, which can be highly betraying to children and damaging to their development. So we tend to forget that this co-parent, the idealized one, the safer one, we tend to not see that parent had a lot of power, but often chose not to use it, to leave the main perpetrator or at least be honest about the main perpetrator. And yes, sometimes these type of parents are just completely stuck in their marriage or their situation, but that is not always true either. That can actually be their narrative. Their narrative can be, I couldn't do anything, when that may not be entirely true. They maybe should have stepped in and protected their kids more, but didn't. They should have really taken a look at what was really going on, but they had their head in the sand about it. We're going to be looking at that as well. We'll walk through 10 points to really explore this other parent, the safer parent. So there is often more healing work and more deeper therapy work that actually needs to be done about this safer parent, because we tend to look at them as maybe another victim in the whole family system when that was not entirely true. You'll see what I mean when we go through these examples. So let's just get into them. Number 1, they are not protective of their children and they're neglectful. This type of parent is pretty self-consumed. So when the toxic parent is abusing the kids, this parent is either MIA, or they're oblivious to the abuse, or they don't want to get the wrath of their toxic spouse and they don't step in. Even in later years, this type of parent is completely removed if you're dating someone that's not good for you. They have no idea about it, no opinion on it, and they don't do anything about it. Number 2, they are codependent. This means that this type of parent should probably divorce the toxic parent, but they just don't. They can either have an attitude of kill the toxic parent with kindness, and they're just trying to be seen as a worthwhile spouse to this toxic parent, which is really bad modeling for their children, or they're engaged in some awful kind of power struggle with the toxic parent of trying to get them essentially to not be toxic. Why this is bad for the children is that what is modeled is that you're modeled to stay in a really bad relationship and make yourself selfless in some way, or engage in a really nasty power struggle. Number 3, they allow their children to be parentified, where the child is the parent. What this means is the toxic marriage is so dysfunctional that the children, let's say the oldest starts taking care of the younger kids, because mom and dad are just consumed with each other. Or this type of parent who has a toxic spouse doesn't recognize that their children have needs as children, and these children just bring themselves up. Often throughout the course of these signs, as you'll see a parent who is really not engaged with their kids. Number 4, they are more loyal to toxic people than to you. Again, this type of parent who is married to a toxic parent, or even if there was a divorce, that this type of parent really has poor relationship skills, and they'll often get involved with other toxic people, romantically or otherwise. And they can really chase that person and be neglectful of their children to the point that the children don't even know if they exist or not. Number 5, they can enjoy being martyred for enduring the more toxic parent. Here is where some sneaky, covert narcissism comes in. The parent who is codependent, who sort of enjoys sympathy or applause for putting up with someone who's more toxic, well, that is really being wrapped up in their own image, and it's not coming from an authentic place. This is not good for children to see because it's modeling that the toxic person comes first, and it's much better to be the person who puts up with that, as opposed to someone who teaches authentic empowerment and boundaries. It's also modeling that toxic people are to be endured when it should be modeled you get away from toxic people. Number 6, they teach submission and diminished self versus boundaries and empowerment. This is the classic parent who says, don't make mom mad, don't make dad mad, just be like me, just do what I do. And that is teaching children, again, to more endure and deal with the toxic parent, as opposed to really setting a hard and fast limit, getting out of there and setting empowering boundaries, where oftentimes this type of parent can bond with their children over putting up with somebody and doing those just do what I do type tactics. And children who experience that in childhood grow up in adulthood and become codependent themselves. Number 7, they have limited ability to love their children fully. This leaves the child having a certain sense of longing for an authentic connection with this type of parent. And they can say things throughout their life that's like, oh, I can't make it, I'd love to see you, but I just can't. Or if there's a divorce, this person is sort of so engaged with their new family that they don't really sort of put the attention and care into their first children. This one's a little bit tricky, and it goes even beyond that in a way that the limited ability to love can be where I had a client who went to their mother after all these years and said, Mom, my marriage is breaking up. And the first reaction from the mother was something like, why didn't I know about this? Which was a really odd response to sort of having a child who's going through this devastating thing. And that's an example of their limited ability. They're kind of there, but they're there from a very distant place. It's an odd experience. Number 8, they can easily betray you. This can look like wait till your father gets home kind of betrayal, where the person doesn't really know that they have the ability to do some parenting and discipline or process those feelings themselves, and they always default to the toxic parent. And oftentimes this betrayal can often look like the child going, I need help with the toxic parent, and then this type of parent goes straight to the toxic parent and discloses it all there, and it becomes a big mess. Or that, some big stuff comes up in the person's life, and then this person gossips with all the siblings, aunts, and uncles, and that your business is not kept confidential with this type of parent. Number 9, they don't relate to you like a normal parent would. This is not a normal adult-child relationship. Oftentimes you can wonder, are you their child or are you their confidant? Are you their child or are you their rescuer? Are you their child or are you their surrogate spouse? Are you their child versus being the cheerleader for them? Or are you their child versus their fellow survivor? They can bond with you about how terrible life is or how bad the world is, as opposed to really helping you survive and thrive in it. You can see the narcissism come through in this type of dynamic because the parent looks to the child to be the resource for them, as opposed to it being the other way around, which would be healthy, where the child looks to the adult as the emotional resource. Number 10, how they love you is confusing. What this means is that the relationship with this parent is confusing in the way that they can seem like they are invested in you, but it's always left with something a little bit empty. An example that there can be a lot of gifts without sincere connection with you about the gift. There can be huge statements of love for you without really knowing who you are or what's going on with you. There can be a lot of empty promises, and this type of parent can engage in missing huge parts of your life. What I mean by that, if there's a divorce or something's going on, is this type of parent can be really removed from you, but puts a lot of energy into seeming like they're there. So here are some final thoughts. So if any of these examples jumped out at you, maybe do some reflection about if you spend some time in your life really protecting this safer parent, either in your mind or you've literally protected them, like protected their character. Take some time with this, because it's kind of an awakening, and it's a process that's a bit painful when you wake up to the idea that you've had a safer parent who wasn't actually safe. But some good that can come of it, you might have an answer for the first time about something called your codependency. You might have an idea about where some codependency comes from looking at this safer parent. You can think about it as the biggest outcome looking at the safer parent is if we were drawn to, in our present life, if we're drawn to tragic people, if we tend to caretake or people please, that's really where this stuff can really kind of come from. And especially if you find yourself getting triggered around those things. This is really the most important takeaway from the video, our codependency. If you find yourself getting triggered to friends and partners about really not being there for you, or you're perceiving abandonment, that's a subconscious thing running you about this safer parent. And all that sort of triggered energy, where it might come from. Someone who is growing up in a system like this, where one parent is highly abusive and the other one is kind of MIA, they can really be sensitive when people don't show up for them. And that's also how the legacy of the safer parent kind of manifests. So that's really the whole point of the awareness on this piece about doing some sort of looking at our childhood in a deeper way, is also to find out about how it affects our present lives, such as our codependency. Like, how do we get triggered around people not showing up for us, or people pleasing, or tragic people that we're drawn to, or feeling things for people? We needed the safer parent to protect us from overly feeling for others. And how do we maybe react to people, places, and things? Where does this stuff kind of come from? The parent who is sort of half there or not fully there is a huge, huge component to themselves about our sense of self and our safety. So if this was of value to you, if you liked the video, hit the subscribe button, hit any kind of button on the screen you can't miss with any of the buttons. And I would also love to hear your thoughts in the comments, or if you have some questions. You can also check right up here and check out my healing membership, where we talk about specific issues such as like what we described in this video, as well as you can have access to some live events with me and some archives of materials and resources on childhood trauma. I hope that this video is helpful to you, and as always, may you be filled with loving kindness, may you be well, may you be peaceful and at ease, and may you be joyous. And I will see you next time.